Brad Watson, welcome. Thank you for agreeing to do this conversation with me about spirit. How are you doing?
I am doing well, considering the circumstances. Could use a haircut, but all is well.
I cut my own hair, Brad. It was an
Wow.
adventure. And then
Wow.
my wife cleaned it up a little bit
Clean it up.
after I
Yes.
cut my hair, but
Yes.
we certainly haven't come to talk about hair. Should we just jump
No.
right in?
Let's jump in. Let's do
Let's
it.
do it.
Go
Have
ahead,
you
ask
had
me.
have you had what you might call a God encounter or a mystical experience of divine presence?
Hmm. Yeah. Can I tell a story?
Of course you can.
Because I was teaching on this very thing in the fall. I'll try to keep this short, condense it down. But I was talking about God experiences. I referred to them as goat on cow moments because I had encountered this really interesting story about this couple. They're going down the highway. The person in the passenger seat says, "Oh my goodness, you have to pull over. There's a goat standing on top of a cow." And the driver's like, "What are you talking about? You're crazy." Anyway, they go back and forth, and she convinces him to turn around and go back. They pull over to the side of the highway, and sure enough, there's a goat standing on top of a cow. And eventually the cow gets off, the goat gets off the cow, and they realize at their feet are hundreds of letters on the side of the highway. And it turned into this whole multiple year, 10-year thing, trying to get these letters back to the original owner. It turned out the grandson of the person who wrote these letters fallen out of his truck on a move, took 10 years to get it back. Long story. But I use this as an example of how we need to, kind of like Moses in the burning bush, there are times we encounter things we need to turn away. And I was talking about this in the sermon, and I was filming outside at the time, looking for places. So I'm driving out to farm country. I'm 2 hours away from where I am. And the whole time I am secretly, because I know you shouldn't pray petty prayers like this, but I'm asking God if I could please see a goat on a cow, because if I could film that, it would be fantastic. So I'm making this point. We need to keep our eyes open and be aware. I don't find that, but I pull into this farm, and it looks like it's going to be a good venue to shoot from. And so I'm trying to find the perfect spot. Eventually I run into the farmer. He's doing some activities. And I say, "Hey, do you mind if I shoot on your farm?" And he's a little gruff with me. He's like, "Where are you from? What church are you from?" I said, "Nexus in Kitchener." And he's like, "Fine, just don't hurt the crops or anything like that." So I shoot the whole sermon about seeing goats on cows and being open to divine encounter. And that Sunday morning, so this was on a Friday, that Sunday morning, I get an email from this guy. He had tracked me down. And he said, I'm sorry I was a little gruff with you. I was busy that day. He said, "I've gone to church my whole life, and I just wanted to ask you. I know you're a pastor, don't know what kind." He said, "Both of my kids are gay, and I've been told my entire life in church that they're going," and I remember he said they're going to the hot place. Like he couldn't even get himself to say hell. And then he said, "I just thought it would be interesting to see what this pastor who stumbled onto my farm thought." And so I got this email exchange with him, right? Trying to tell him, "No, I don't think your kids are going to the hot place," right? And it was just, I tend to notice sometimes divine encounters after the fact. Sometimes they don't happen immediately in the moment. But this whole time I'm looking for a literal goat on cow, and I encountered this farmer. And of course, in my head, this is not the kind of person that you think is going to engage on this way, just stereotypes myself. And then we have this meaningful conversation simply because I happened to run into him looking to preach a sermon on staying awake to God's presence. And it was it was just so surreal to know that there are people we're going to bump into in life, and we have no idea what their story is behind that. And in that moment, it felt like one of those burning bush moments, a God encounter moment. And yet I didn't recognize it at the time. It was only down the road. So there, and you can write off a story like that pretty easily. But there's something about it that feels, yes, very, very much a divine encounter.
Hmm. yeah, that's kind of like a divine appointment, maybe
Mm,
someone would say,
mhm.
or divine orchestration of
Right.
meeting with someone at the, or synchronicity, some people
Yeah.
might use that word.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting you say it's in hindsight, you realize you see divine presence, maybe not in the moment, but in hindsight, you see, in old language, we see the hand of God at work in that moment.
Right. Yes.
And
Yes.
uh, yeah, I'm wondering if you have another story of, I want to come back to some of the things you said in that, but I'm wondering if you have another experience that just felt more
Mm,
what like pure encounter, like you
your encounter.
where
Yeah, and I'd hesitate to say with that story. I get caught up on stuff. I don't know if that was like orchestrated. I get nervous about God caused you to pull in that farm. So that stuff makes me a bit nervous.
I was just gonna say like a kind of like a spirit baptism moment or a
Mm,
filling of the
mm.
Holy Spirit moment.
Yes. Yeah, I think direct moments do happen. I remember I've been walking a lot lately during COVID. It's just a way to be prayerful, mindful. And there's a bingo hall right down the street from us. And during the different phases of lockdown, they can only have, they're shut down, or they can have 50 people in there. And what ended up happening is on the first phase of opening, they could only have 50 people there. And these people would start lining up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So bingo game starts at 7, and it looks every day, every afternoon, same people. It looks like they're lining up for a concert. They got their lawn chairs there. They're just sitting out there for 5 hours waiting to play bingo.
Wow.
And I remember, I've walked by them a number of times, but so one particular day I'm walking by them, same crowd, they're lined up out there. And I remember thinking in my head, these people are such losers. Like, who has 5 hours to sit around every day to play bingo? And I'm just sort of scorching them in my head, like pathetic, just. And I had this moment, and it was weird because we all have internal dialogue, and this was a bit different. This word came into my head. It was simply this: you know that I love them too, right? And it it startled me because I chastise myself a lot in my head, but it's never in it's the way this was phrased. It didn't sound the way I normally talk in my head. um you know that I love them too, right? And in the moment I'm thinking, well, if this is me, no, I don't love them. Like, what is this? And in that moment, whatever it was, it felt like a divine experience, like right in that moment, because I was very convicted about how I had been thinking about these people. And it completely flipped it, because particularly as pastors, church people, I have a real craving to be with our people. And so it immediately just flipped, like, hey, maybe this bingo hall is the only point of community these people have. And in these times, we're all desperate to be with our people. And, for them, maybe
Mm,
it's, hey, we're willing to line up for 5 hours just to be with our crew. It just really flipped the narrative
mm.
for me from this scorching judgment to, wow, hey, we're all human. We're all looking for connection here. So, yeah.
Yeah, you actually answered my next questions in a way.
Mm.
I was asked, the follow-up question was what led up to the experience and what changed as a result. But I think you've
Mm.
already answered that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
you you had a, what did you say? Complete. It flipped your whole
Yeah, it's
mindset.
changed the narrative in my head. It helped me see, a lot of the mystics talk about, I think it was Thomas Merton, right, who has this experience, this famous experience on the street corner where he
Yeah.
knows everyone's loved, right? And
Yes.
it did the same thing for me. I could see these people as loved by God, but also that what they were doing was, sure, it's bingo, but there's a bigger narrative going
Mm,
on here. This is a yearning for community and connection, which I think we all have right now. So it was able to humanize the situation. But preceded by walking, and I think this is where having habits, walking for me is a spiritual practice
mm,
that allows me to slow down and turn it into kind of a prayerful, mindful walk. And so I don't know if I had been, say, driving my car and listening to the radio. I don't know if that happens. I think I probably drive by and go, ridiculous, you know. So I think having practices is important to help us be in the right space so that we can see those moments when they happen.
See the goat on top of the cow.
Goat on the cow. Yes, yes.
All right, next question. I'm just going to keep moving along because I got a lot of questions. But how would you describe the flow of spirit in your life?
Oh, flow of spirit. Well, I always, this is a tough one. I always am working on the assumption that the spirit is always at work, always whispering, nudging. And the larger question is whether I'm paying attention or not. So that's sort of my starting place. Less, hey, I'm looking for some sort of direct intervention, but the spirit is always moving, prompting. It's just a question of almost like a frequency. Am I tuned into that? And so every day is a question of how do you tune into that? And you know, we can have horrible practices that help us, or things that are much more healthy, I think. So for instance, you know, if your first routine in the morning is to check your phone immediately and be consumed by news and whatever, you might not be on the same signal, the same wavelength, but maybe there are other things we can do to start our day or later on in the day, reorient ourselves, I think, to that. I'm curious what you would say, or am I allowed to flip things around? God, I love flipping things around.
Yeah, no, you can't do that. Like I'm interviewing you, so that because if I start talking about that, then I'll talk for a really long time. Because I'm like obsessed with this. This is kind of my topic of choice. So
okay, see, but this is what I'm curious of. Do you think that there's always a sort of spirit working in our lives in the background and it's about tuning in, or is it, no, we're waiting for sort of in-breaking moments?
Wow. I tend to be with the former.
Yeah.
Although I think there are breakthrough moments on a totally different level.
Yeah.
Same as, you know, thin places. I think there are moments that are thinner than others.
Yeah.
That it's not just due to our awareness.
Right.
Like, so it's
right.
I think there are moments of grace where it has nothing to do with me tuning in or paying attention. Is just, I guess it's the goat on top of the cow moment where you can't help but notice it's.
Yeah.
But for the most part, yeah, I think it's exactly like us tuning into the divine frequency.
Yeah.
As I get older, at least the season I'm in now, I think the presence and activity of the spirit is more and more subtle. Just so, yeah. But anyway,
I think this is good stuff. And I think it's an important reminder, because I think if you go too far down the tuning in to the wavelength, the frequency thing, it can become very much, well, that's for the saints then who are, you know, they're meditating 3 hours a day. And, you know, it becomes very much, I almost feel, inaccessible to some people. Yeah. So I think that's an important correction.
But the other extreme is dangerous too, in my opinion. That, well, there's a couple variations of it. I mean, there's a lot of people who think if we pray the right way, or if the worship band just plays the right song, then all of a sudden God shows up.
You're right.
I don't even know how to address that, because music is powerful. It doesn't have to be a worship band. I mean, that interview that we heard, I forget her name. It was about the Vineyard movement, the Toronto Airport
Yeah,
movement,
yes,
and she
yes.
she talked about these experiences growing up, and then she was surprised when she felt the same thing at a Coldplay concert.
Yeah,
The
yes,
same
exactly.
how did she describe it? The same liquid honey warmth of love or whatever, something
Right.
like that. And then she experienced it at this Coldplay concert. And I think there's some truth to that. You play chords a certain way and you have a good enough guitarist who knows tone and
Mm,
like you're gonna get the feelies.
yeah,
And spirit is in that. I mean,
for
like
sure.
it's but I'm very hesitant to think that we can conjure up
Right.
that's more of a pagan approach to
I would agree.
the
Yeah.
what I've just noticed in my own life is divine presence is always there.
Mm,
And even when I'm trying to pay attention and tune in, that doesn't mean
yeah.
I'm going to sense it in a profound way.
Right.
I remember talking to a monk because I go to these monasteries to do retreats and I love talking to these monks. That's all they do while they make bread and then they pray
Yeah.
and they be quiet. They have vows of silence. Even he was like, we do our stuff, we do our prayers, and sometimes, we feel God once in a while,
Right.
like it's there's no formula, there's no, it
No,
just
and it's
doesn't work that way.
the danger of telling stories about encounters, in my experience, is that it can skip right over the boredom or the 100 other walks where nothing happened. Um, so there's a danger there, but you also don't want to not tell those stories because these moments, they come by surprise, right? Sometimes to us. But yeah, there's a lot of mundane stuff that happens in between that's, well, it's just part of life, I guess.
But again, the you don't want to just totally release it to it's just random chance, because
Mm,
clearly spiritual disciplines and practices increase your sensitivity to spirit and increase your
yes,
awareness. And
yes.
so it's not as if there's nothing we can do to increase our percentage
Yeah, per se.
of being able to tune into divine presence. I really do think there are many things that we can do, and a disciplined life in any area of life,
Right.
including spirituality, just makes sense.
Yeah.
But we're kind of moving off topic here. I'm supposed to be asking you
Let's come back.
questions,
All right.
and we're kind of diving into the next question, which is,
Yeah.
how is your understanding of divine spirit changed over the years?
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, we grew up in a tradition that didn't, at least that I recall, have a lot to say about the spirit. And so, not growing up in, say, a charismatic tradition that has a lot to say about it, um, to me, the the spirit was always just kind of this thing you kind of embarrassed about, right? Like, because back in the day it was Holy Ghost, right? And it's like, oh, that's a little weird. I don't know what that means. But for me, I think I've come to see, well, a lot about what we've talked about, and I love how you use the spirit's presence as subtle, because I've also come to believe that God is not regularly fond of using power, and that there's a lot of problems with that. And so to expect the sort of the lightning, the thunder, sign of these big moments, it's, I hope it's Elijah, or else I'm going to look silly. Elijah's encounter with God, right, where God passes, and it's not the thunderstorm. It's not, it's the small, quiet voice. And to me, it's whispers and nudges that I'm looking for. Understanding that I think those are always there. I'm repeating myself now. It's just a matter of tuning into that frequency. But I think the spirit can be almost like like a stage play where even though the actor isn't necessarily on the stage, you can feel their presence the whole time, right? Like they're sort of hanging over. You can get this in TV shows too, right? Say a Breaking Bad. Like there's certain characters where even when they're not on screen, their character is kind of haunting the whole story, just hanging there. And I think the Spirit often feels like that. If we have eyes to see it, that there's a hauntedness, an enchantment to our world. And so I'm also trying to be much more open to, I don't know if I want to use the word magical, but sort of, yeah, entrenched in wonder that I can't always see. So I find this stuff hard to talk about a lot of times, but yeah, I don't know if that answers the question or not, but
Yep.
I bumbled my way through that.
For sure it does. And this kind of relates to what we've been talking about, but can you talk about the randomness or spontaneity or the seasons of the flow of Spirit in your life, or that you've noticed in churches or the lives of others?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm feeling due for a divine encounter. I'll be honest at the moment. You know, these last few days leading up to the end of the school year are feeling they're dragging me down. So I'm due for something. But there are seasons, and I think the other great thing about discipline and having some experience in this is you start to realize the rhythms of years and weather and seasons. And so I know, having tracked my own spiritual journey over time, that I tend to always feel this way in June. I feel lack of energy. Now, COVID is exasperating it, but I tend to feel dry. A lot of that is tied up with church calendar stuff. But I think when you're just starting out, some of this stuff can be really can be frightening. Like, oh, have I been left alone here? Or you start questioning the experiences that you've had in the past. Like maybe I was making those up. But I think when you get into rhythms over years, you start to go, okay, I know what's going on here. I'm tired. I probably need a vacation. You know, that sort of thing, right? And so on a personal level, I think there's a lot to be said about having the discipline to track where you go and what sort of things trigger heightened awareness, or what things tend to block you from being in tune with the Spirit. So on a personal level, that's sort of how I understand what someone could call dark nights of the soul. I don't think I'm in that. I think that's a prolonged period of time thing. But how you start to track and name different seasons where God either feels very present or it's just tough slogging, you know.
Yeah, I did a series on the dark night of the soul, and not everyone appreciated that. One lady came up to me after, it was like, I don't know, the third or fourth, and she's like, if you say dark night of the soul one more time. She was threatening me. It was interesting.